Deep in the rugged wilderness of Siskiyou County, California, where dense forests blend seamlessly with isolated mountains, comes one of the most unsettling Bigfoot accounts ever documented. Featured in the UFO news clipping services in early 1982, this story involves not just a fleeting sighting but a prolonged encounter, a siege, that left a family shaken and searching for answers. The events took place over the span of 3 harrowing nights in the summer of 1981, when a rural family experienced what can only be described as a coordinated series of events involving one or more large, unidentified creatures. The Harlan family, Daniel, his wife Sheila, and their 2 young sons, had recently moved into a small, aging cabin near Bailey Creek, nestled on the edge of a sprawling forest. Daniel, a construction worker, had taken a summer job nearby, and the cabin served as temporary housing for the family. It was secluded but peaceful, at least at first. On the night of July 16, 1981, the peace was shattered. Sheila was the first to notice something strange. As the family sat by the fireplace after dinner, she heard a faint knocking sound coming from outside. It wasn't rhythmic like a woodpecker, it was deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. "Dan," she whispered, "someone's outside." Daniel, thinking it was a prank or perhaps a curious animal, grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch. He shone the light into the trees but saw nothing unusual. As he turned to go back inside, he heard a low, guttural growl that made his stomach drop. It was close, but the darkness masked its source. Daniel didn't tell Sheila what he heard. "Just a raccoon," he said, brushing it off to avoid worrying her. But inside he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching him. The following evening, the family put the boys to bed early, but around midnight, Daniel and Sheila woke to the sound of heavy footsteps circling the cabin. The footsteps were deliberate, slow, calculated, and far too heavy to belong to a person or common animal. Daniel grabbed his rifle, quietly telling Sheila to keep the boys inside the bedroom. Heart pounding, he opened the front door and stepped out onto the porch. This time his flashlight caught something, 2 glowing red eyes set high in the trees staring directly at him. It was standing between the trees, maybe 40 feet away, Daniel would later recount to investigators. Its eyes were reflecting the light, and it was huge, I mean massive, 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It didn't move, it just watched me. Frozen in fear, Daniel stood there for what felt like an eternity before the figure turned and vanished into the trees with shocking speed. When Daniel returned inside, he locked the doors and told Sheila what he'd seen. Neither of them slept for the rest of the night. By the 3rd night, the tension in the cabin was unbearable. The boys had noticed their parents' unease, and Sheila insisted they all sleep in the same room. Around 2 a.m., the noises started again, first the knocking, then the heavy footsteps. This time, it was worse. Something began hitting the walls of the cabin, hard enough to rattle the windows. Sheila screamed as a massive thud struck the back of the house, followed by deep, guttural growls that seemed to echo all around them. "It sounded like there were 2 of them," Daniel said later, "one at the back, one circling to the front. They were testing us." Gripping his rifle, Daniel opened the front door and fired a warning shot into the air. For a moment, the forest went silent. Then came a scream, an inhuman, ear-splitting howl that made Daniel's blood run cold. The noises continued for another hour, growls, knocking, and the sound of something pacing around the cabin, just beyond the reach of the flashlight beam. Finally, as dawn began to break, the sound stopped, and the forest grew still. When daylight arrived, Daniel searched the perimeter of the cabin. What he found left no doubt that something large, and unknown, had been there. Massive footprints, nearly 20 inches long and 7 inches wide, encircled the property. Some prints were so deep that Daniel believed whatever made them must have weighed at least 600 pounds. Even more disturbing were the claw marks gouged into the wooden siding of the cabin, as though something had been trying to tear its way inside. Shaken and terrified, the Harlan family packed their belongings and left the cabin that same day. Daniel reported the incident to local authorities, but they dismissed it as a bear attack or overactive imagination. When the story was picked up by UFO news clipping services, it sparked interest among Bigfoot researchers, several of whom visited the site in the months that followed. Investigators found evidence of more tracks in the area, as well as reports from other locals who had heard strange howls and knocking sounds near Bailey Creek. The story became a cornerstone of Bigfoot lore in Siskiyou County. Years later, Daniel Harlan was interviewed again for a documentary on cryptid encounters. Though time had passed, his voice still carried the weight of that terrifying night. "I don't know what it was," he said, But I know it wasn't a bear, and it wasn't a man. Whatever's out there in those woods, it's smart, it's strong, and it knows when you're afraid. The Bailey Creek incident remains one of the most chilling and well-documented Bigfoot encounters of the early 1980s. It serves as a reminder that the wilderness still holds secrets that are waiting, watching, and perhaps testing those who dare to enter their domain.